Hi, everyone, and welcome to Portals of Perception. I'm here with Aviv. My name is Ari, and Aviv is a longtime friend and mentor of mine. We've known each other for about 4 years now. And through those years, have had numerous beautiful conversations focused on growth, development, the world we live in. What I'm going to try and get through in this conversation is, what is it like to transition from a very theoretical, academic driven understanding of the world to sort of the in the trenches experience when you're actually in a company. And right now, for a tiny bit of context, I work in one of the biggest technology companies in the world, and I've been there for about a year and a half. So what is the lived experience like there? Where is the beauty? Where are the challenges? Where do things that you learned really apply, and where do they sort of fall apart? And how does that feel going through all of that? And as Aviv always does, I'm sure he's going to bring up some amazing frameworks, some new ways of thinking about the challenges I'm going through. But at the end of the day, I hope you can at least relate to a little bit of what this experience is and share in the collective humanness that we all experience day to day. And with that, Aviv, so good to be here with you, and thanks for having me.
This is a cross-generational, meaning-making discovery conversation. Ari initially got in touch with me nearly 4 years ago, and he was working at the time on his advanced organizational psychology degree, and we developed a robust year-long or more than a year-long conversation, including we worked on a collaboration to develop what we called at the time the reframe workshop experience. Other threads that were central for our conversation were Ari's journey, his professional development, and his philosophical and developmental pursuits. In the last year or so, Ari took the leap from academic research and inquiry into the professional arena, and he's working in one of the largest technology companies in the world. And so a particular body of work that he developed where he focused on meaning-making frameworks and how to approach and develop these, he had the opportunity to confront the work in the trenches. And so this is a delicious time to catch up and ask Ari about his experience in terms of confronting theory with the actuality of the corporate experience, and what are some of the key learnings through that experience. So Ari, great to have you here. First, what would you like to add to this?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me here. It's so exciting to see Portals of Perception coming alive. I know that's been a dream of yours for quite some time. And I see many of the threads of everything we were working on previously manifesting in this. So it's beautiful to see, and I'm really glad to be chatting with you today. In terms of my background, honestly don't have a whole ton to add. I have to be a little bit discreet about what I'm currently working on. But as you said, it's in a big company. I do a lot of behavioral science and organizational psychology. So really things around just helping employees live their best life at work that they can. And yeah, I graduated about a year ago with a master's in organizational psychology, and it's been just a super interesting transition, trying to apply everything that I learned to the corporate setting, and also reinventing a lot of it, forgetting a lot of it, losing track of a lot of it, and then seeing it reappear in weird ways. So it's been an exciting transition.
Well, so let's slow the conversation down and ask you a little more about the forgetting and the re-remembering and the reinventing, and what are some important insights through this journey?
Yeah, so It depends on what I'm working on, but in my day-to-day, I don't use a ton of the theories that I studied in school. And this conversation specifically was catalyzed by a presentation I created for one of my classes around sense making. It was called Making Sense of Sense Making, and it just gave a whole bunch of practices, frameworks, mental models, that sort of stuff to help you deal with complexity. And those largely have sort of been sitting in my broom closet gathering dust. They have not really been translated into my work for the most part. That being said, so in terms of actually translating, or I guess engaging in the process of framing or of sense making within the corporate world, it's much less me applying specific theories that I learned previously to current challenges, and much more about catalyzing an inner state that allows me to respond to challenges as they arise, and do so in an adaptive way, I guess.
First of all, what do you mean when you talk about inner state in that sense? And also in your notes that you sent me a couple of days ago in preparation for our call today, you reflected about the difference between the free flow process of framing to the structured process of framing. And I partly infer from that the structured process is more to do with those mental models that perhaps were part of the academic training that are useful or not. And you're saying most of them are not necessarily being used in the day-to-day. And the free flow is more to do with what you're able to access or activate or create in the moment.
So you're right about the structured process. That's exactly what I was referring to. In terms of the more free form process, I think back to this book that I read a couple of years ago. It's a fun fantasy novel, and in it there is this scene where the main character is standing underneath this tree, and it's really stormy outside, and the leaves are blowing, and the branches are whipping back and forth, and he is able to get into this state of mind where he begins to move effortlessly with the branches of the tree and is able to walk through them without being touched or hurt by them. And at the end of that experience, he calls that state of mind that allowed him to do that spinning leaf. And that is sort of how it feels to me. It's a sense of free flow within your own mind. It's people throw about the term like flow states a lot and all that sort of stuff, but it's not exactly that. It's more of like a sense of looseness and a sense of freedom and a sense of joy that you can tap into. And there's lots of ways you can get to that state, and I can talk through some of those. But once you're in that state, the process of framing becomes totally different. It's not applying rigid structured things to, you're not trying to box in ideas with things you learned from someone long ago, but you're more looking for what the emergent possibilities might be within a given problem or challenge. And it's sort of like, and I'm not sure how much you've talked about this on portals, but you always talked about the mental bungee jump, where it's sort of a fun practice where you just throw out a number like 4, and you're like, there are 4 vectors to this challenge, and then you try and list them out. And this sort of mind state, this way of being, allows for that kind of activity much more readily. So that's what I find myself doing more, honestly, in the corporate world, is I give myself a couple minutes to get into this state of mind, and then I just kind of run with it. I just start drawing out diagrams. I start like mapping the primary components of the challenge. I work backwards from, whatever business problem it is, and try and, arrive at some more core first principles, but really at the end of it, just letting my mind roam free and just drawing and creating and looking at it more as a process of creation rather than a process of, I guess, kind of confining something to a predefined framework.
Well, so you made reference there to the mental bungee jump, and you're also making a reference to what became for us a core element of the reframe experience. So let me try and offer a distinction here, which in a way is a mental model, and inside that walk through how I use this practice, and then see what would you say to that? Because the key idea that we looked at in the reframe experience was that you could actually develop what we call the universal operating system. The universal operating system is an idea where, in my case, I was not taken through the more scholarly or academic training. You could say I was initiated more in the esoteric path into this, and what that means, and it's a simple way to instantiate or explain the esoteric path, was that I became fascinated by the core principles of how the world works. So I literally spent many hours earlier in life collecting examples and identifying in the various dynamics and domains that I walked into, how do I see polarities? How do I see polarities and dualities in those domains? How do I see this idea of 3 vectors or 3 octaves, or the 3 dimensions of the thing I was looking at, whether it was looking at what is the positive, the neutral, and the negative elements of it, or how did the past, present, and future showed up in it, or what was another way to look at the 3 main building blocks, whether it was the body, mind, and spirit of the domain that I was looking at. Similarly with the cycles and the many expressions of the 4. So because I have literally discovered or identified or outlined or named overtly 10,000 cases of any of these, you could say that that operating system, that's what I call the universal operating system, is humming in the background. And those are just some of the apps that are active on that operating system. So when I walk into a situation, and I've literally been to many situations when I would be working with a group of executives, and somebody would, as you describe, would say something, and I would take the mental bungee jump. That's the mental bungee jump. I would say, well, there are really 5 dimensions to this conundrum, or to this problem, or to this opportunity. And I'll take the few steps to the flip chart. And in those few steps, what actually happens is that when I said that, 2 or 3 things happen. It activates the thousands of times that I said something like this or looked at a 5-fold structure, and it brings all those set of experiences and references. And then there is what you described, that semi-flow state, and it reconfigures itself in an emergent way in the context of the problem we are looking at. And I would give, I would name those. So this could be that I'm in a conversation with a senior executive team or one person, and we are looking at something that came up, and I would say, well, we have a strategic issue here, we have an organizational culture issue, we have an execution issue, we have a brand issue, and we have a horizon 0 urgent problem that we need to solve. and we would then map those 5. So that's a way to bucketize or organize the issues. And because I've done it probably more than 10,000 times now, it becomes handy. So in that sense, I am not structured, but I have an inner structure that supports and offer scaffolding to the problem I'm facing. What is fascinating in the way you are relaying your experience, you've learned all sorts of mental models, and what for me is interesting in this inquiry is how do you discover what works and what is relevant, and how do you bring to the table those elements that you choose to activate and or create anew.
Yeah. Just quickly circling back before I get to that, to the universal operating system. I always love that metaphor. Maybe not a metaphor, maybe just a truth, but I think what you're hinting at is something that I've thought about a lot in terms of music or in terms of other creative pursuits, is, you know, you really have to be a proficient jazz musician. You have to know the lay of the land. You have to know the scales, the chords. And then from there, other things can emerge out of that when you're actually improvising. Without that sort of deep practice and deep confidence and deep knowledge, you're limited. So you're saying you've built, you've gone through these 5-fold, 4-fold, 2 polarities, 4 seasons, all that stuff, so many times that's really alive for you, and that's really a skill that you've honed. So you can step into a new space and create something new with those same basic building blocks, essentially.
Let me add one layer of awareness to it. It frees me up to lead from the unconscious, which is something we have spoken about on Portal's conversations. The key insight here, you can lead from the unconscious when you consciously seeded the unconscious diligently with discipline, because all those frames of reference and all those inquiries, they actually produce that, if you like, system that hums in the background and enables you to be responsive and in flow. Because as you said, you know the scales, you know the chords, you know how those systems operate.
So circling back to your question that you asked initially, you were asking about how do you grow in this capability, and how do you understand what actually worked, and how do you build a practice around that, and get a better sense of what is actually having an impact. So I think that is my developmental edge. That is the thing that I am trying to figure out, because the challenge here is, it's honestly just for me one of mental bandwidth, one of energy, because that takes some energy, and you have to go back and consciously reflect a fair amount on what you did, how it was perceived, what impact it led to. And it almost has to be a pretty intentional like journaling exercise, or some way in which you're capturing whatever insights arose from your practice. And at the end of the day, after a long day working in one of these big companies, you don't always have that extra energy to do that. So I found myself in a situation where I've tried a lot of things, where I've sat down and tried to be creative and bungee jump and apply interesting new frameworks. But then after I do it and I get through that presentation, or I get through that meeting, there's a sense of relief, but there's also just a sense of like just needing to disconnect and not think about work, and then move on and spend time not constantly in that same domain. So I think the challenge for me is, how can I find more joy in doing that? How can I make it not a chore at the end of the day that I have to do? And how can I make it something that makes me feel more alive? Because at this point it doesn't, and I haven't been doing it, and I see the consequences.